There is not a fisheries biologist in this country that is going, I want to get rid of all the hydraulic.
Yeah.
I want to get rid of all the grass.
I guess so.
That is not the reality. The fallacy is that if I catch a bass, that if I release it, it's going to grow bigger.
I've probably killed quite a few fish because of the way that I handled them. Is that necessarily a bad thing?
I would slightly disagree.
Okay. Do you think tournaments are doing too much harm?
Most state agencies are not going to jump to the conclusion that they need to ban forward-facing sonar. But truthfully, the best thing for you to go out and do is to keep your limit of fish. Here's the misconception about public water. We live in a catch and release culture, and that's wrong.
It's wrong.
Here's probably the hardest pill to swallow is...
Today on TRF, I'm joined by one of the leading voices for fisheries management across the entire US, Stephen Barton. For almost 2 decades, Stephen has been managing both public and private bodies of water, helping to create sustainable solutions to many of the problems our ponds and lakes that we fish in have. In this episode, we will discuss topics like what characteristics make a good fishing pond? Is forward-facing sonar bad for fish populations? And is bed fishing really as harmful to spawning bass as we've been told? And that's really just the tip of the iceberg. This interview is absolutely jam-packed with awesome information if you love to bass fish. So without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Stephen Barton.
Well, what's going on, folks, and welcome to TRF. I am excited because, as you heard in the intro, we have the opportunity to interview a really cool, when I say interview, it'll be a conversation, hopefully, even though he is way more knowledgeable about any of this stuff than I am, a fisheries biologist, a outdoorsman extraordinaire. Kind of tell the folks at home how you got into this profession and what your job looks like as a whole.
That's great. It's a little bit long of a story, so we'll highlight version.
Condense it.
Yeah, as about a 14-year-old, I was like probably a lot of your audience. I love to fish. I'd strap my rods to my bike and ride my bike around and fish the local ponds and ask the neighbors to fish and all that. And luckily, one of the people that I fished at was actually my 7th grade math teacher.
Okay.
And Miss Clayton, she said, you can fish, but you have to help my husband with projects. And he was like a pond management extraordinaire before that was a thing,
Got
right?
it.
So we would burn cattails with a pear burner from a boat, and we would harvest fish, and we would fix fish feeders and things like that, and then I could fish. And so I did that from like 14 till I graduated. And whenever I decided to go to college, I went to Tarleton State and got a degree in freshwater biology. Then I went to Texas A&M and got a master's in fisheries science. I was lucky while I was at Tarleton, there's a job board, and on that job board was a local fish farm that was doing pond stocking. So at about 18 years old, I started stocking ponds.
Dang.
So this is my 18th year, Tyler.
That's crazy. 18 years of understanding waters and fish.
Yep.
And I wish I knew what you're about to teach the audience here, even a small amount of it. I feel like my videos could be even better because of that.
Well, we'll teach you.
We'll teach
We'll
me.
go out on the water enough. You'll learn it.
Good.
Yeah.
Now, the first question I want to ask you is what I think most people that watch my channel have in their minds is they fish ponds, they fish small bodies of water. The first question that I get all the time is, how do I know if a pond or a small lake is good? I roll up, I look at it, or I find it on Google Earth. What are some telltale signs of a potentially good pond to fish for bass?
Okay. Number one, you don't want to fish super clear water.
Okay.
Super clear water, like I'm talking like 6, 7, 8 foot of visibility.
Got it.
In the spring and summer, that means a low productivity.
Okay.
So there's not enough plankton to grow fish and create a real food chain. So you don't want super clear water.
Got it.
Same thing with turbid water.
Okay.
Muddy chocolate milk. Those fisheries will still have fish.
Yeah.
And they may have exceptional quality fish, like 1 or 2.
Got it.
But they're not going to produce 100 3-pounders that you would want to catch in a day.
Okay.
So you want to look at color, clarity. Those are the first 2 things.
So what's the best water clarity you think?
Yeah, you want a green tint to the water.
Okay.
Green in the water is a microscopic plant called phytoplankton. And you want somewhere between 2 and 3 foot of visibility. If we're saying like perfect food chain, that's what it is.
Got it. Okay.
If it's a neighborhood pond, HOA, something like that, you may look for other amenities. Like, do they have a dock? Do they have feeders? Do they have air systems? The bubblers coming from the bottom?
Up. Yeah.
Those are signs that somebody's managing that pond.
Okay.
And it's a managed pond. Whenever you manage a pond, you're trying to increase the carrying capacity, the pounds per acre that you can produce.
Okay.
So when I see those signs, I'm already going to know that those fisheries should have a better quality fish population. Now, it may be skewed towards small fish or large fish depending on their management strategies.
Okay.
But you're at least going to know there's potential there, that somebody's investing in it.
Exactly.
So watercolor, clarity, and then amenities.
Got it. What kind of structure, whether it's grasses or woods, what kind of structure is best to make a pond or a small lake good for bass fishing?
A diversity.
Diversity.
Yep.
Okay.
So what you want, if I was drawing out like the perfect pond, I would want somewhere between 15 and 20% to be covered in aquatic vegetation.
Okay.
Depending on the species, we could be talking about something that's extremely dense. That's great for forage species. If it's something that's less dense, then that creates really good edge or ambush points, better for predatory fish. Hardwood, rock, I love a riprap along the dam, and artificial structure. You want a mixture of all of that because they all have their different purposes within the body of water.
Got it. Very interesting. So if I roll up to a pond and it's 95% covered in aquatic vegetation, I think my mind as a fisherman thinks like, oh great, I'll throw a frog over it.
Yeah.
But you're saying that may not be the most healthy fishery because there's too much aquatic
It's
vegetation.
certainly not a healthy fishery.
Got it.
Yeah, it's absolutely not. Once you get above 30% coverage in vegetation, fish become more lethargic.
Okay.
They have smaller home ranges, they eat less often.
Got it.
So you would, in that situation, probably the first cast with a frog, you're gonna catch one.
Okay.
It's probably gonna be very thin.
Got it.
Could be a really good sized fish,
Yeah.
but very thin. That's a sign of this is a really poor pond. In a poor pond, what you end up with is a lot of small fish, let's say 10 to 12 inch fish, and then a couple exceptional individuals that figure out how to eat those fish.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so that makes sense to me. Now, I'm applying this to large bodies of water, but when I was a kid fishing Lake Travis in Austin, the water there is crystal clear.
Crystal
I'm
clear.
20 plus feet.
Yeah,
and
now-
I caught a lot of small fish and very select giants.
That's exactly right.
So you're saying even big lakes, that clear water thing can still apply?
Absolutely. It's whenever you start talking about carrying capacity, that's per acre.
Correct.
So just multiply it by 17,000.
Yeah. if you're looking at an HOA pond and you got stained water, a bubbler, and a dock with a feeder, that means there's probably fish and somebody's managing that pond.
Yep.
Got it. Okay. That's really good to know because oftentimes I'll roll up to a body of water in a neighborhood or even a small lake and I'll launch and I waste way too much time where there could be a big one there, but I guess you're saying that it's probably not worth.
Yeah, but if you go to some of those fisheries and you're like, I am not catching fish.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't feel like a good fishery. It has too much vegetation or maybe it's murky or something like that. That's when you grab a bigger bait.
Okay.
Because the fish that are there, the exceptional individuals,
are bigger
are
ones.
eating the stunted largemouth.
I got it.
So now you got to change your mentality. Like I'm not fishing for bites or numbers. All of a sudden I'm fishing for one bite and I need a big bait to do that.
Very interesting. Okay, I guess now talking about unhealthy fisheries, the one thing that I always thought was a sign of an unhealthy fishery that I believe I've seen on your social medias is I call it snot grass. What's the scientific name for it?
Yeah, filamentous algae.
Filamentous algae.
Yep.
That's not a bad sign.
It's neutral.
It's neutral. Okay.
Yeah, it's fairly neutral. There are some species of algae that are toxic to fish.
Got it.
So they will look more like spilled paint. It'll have a vibrant teal to blue color.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Those are toxic to fish
Okay.
at times.
Yeah.
So if you have an abundance of those, probably not a great area to fish.
Okay.
The more lime green algae, filamentous algae, they don't add a lot to the fishery. They don't hold bait fish in a certain way, but they're not detrimental either.
Got it.
They're annoying to us as anglers.
Correct.
But
you can't
they're-
throw a treble hook lure anywhere
Right.
around that kind of algae.
Now there's always an exception. If that was 80% covered in filamentous algae,
Yeah.
now it's absorbing nutrient and
Okay.
creating clarity.
Got it.
Right.
Very interesting. So that's a great frog situation. If you
Right.
have that much filamentous algae.
Filamentous algae.
Filamentous algae.
There you go. Word of the day.
Big old science words. Now, staying on the topic of grass, I know that's a sore topic for me personally because I grew up on a lake called Lake Austin that had an abundance of hydrilla. Matter of fact, too much, so there was always boats chopping up the hydrilla.
Right.
And then at some point, there was a decision made. They put grass carp in. They said enough spraying, enough collecting. We're just going to eat it all.
Right.
And it destroyed the fishery. I know that same thing happened on Conroe. It's happened at times at Toledo Bend, and I've gone in Northern California, Clear Lake. I was there, and they were with airboats spraying all kinds of chemicals. So what is the thought process around spraying or collecting grass, both private and public, and is it the same 30% that you want to stay under, no matter how big the body of water is?
Okay, we're going to have to divide it into two categories.
Okay.
We're going to have to say private and we're going to have to say public.
Got it.
Because here's the misconception about public water. Lake Austin example.
Correct.
Texas Parks and Wildlife Inland Fisheries is not going to be the one that makes that decision.
Okay.
Texas Parks and Wildlife manages the fish, they're managing the habitat, but at some point a Lake Austin is owned by the city of Austin and the Water Controlling Authority.
Yeah.
The LCRA has part of that decision making.
Okay.
So they might take the advice of the biologist, but at some point, the ability to produce water and for people to have recreational activities outside of fishing may become more important, or for dock owners may become more important.
Okay.
So we have to understand that there is not a fisheries biologist in this country that is going, I want to get rid of all the hydrilla. I want to get rid of all the grass.
I guess so.
That is not the reality.
Okay, great.
The reality is that they make a recommendation to whoever owns the lake.
Got it.
The LCRA, the city of Austin, they own that lake.
I see.
So they make the final decision. So whenever we're talking about wide scale across the country, what's happening is you have a fisheries agency, you have somebody who's a municipality pulling water and sending it to cities, and then you have a lake authority.
Okay.
That could be a river authority, that could be Corps of Engineers.
Got it.
Those are the decision makers, and they each have little components of it. But aquatic vegetation usually doesn't fall to your fisheries biologist to make sense.
Got it.
Yeah.
So I feel like a lot of people blame their fisheries departments.
That's the wrong person to blame, unfortunately.
Got
Okay,
it.
so now the science behind it, like what do I want for vegetation? Yes, in a perfect world, I want 30% coverage or less, 20 to 30%.
Okay.
I don't want it to be a single species. The problem with hydrilla is it becomes a monoculture. It pushes everything else out to where it's the only plant that can grow. Whenever you have single species, that's like one type of habitat.
Yeah.
It only functions in part of the food chain, not every part of the food chain.
Okay.
Hydrilla as well, just on that topic, it has 4 reproductive modes. It can be fragments, it can be buds, it can be turons. If it is both sexes, it could have seeds.
Okay, got it.
That one's pretty rare. Also, hydrilla is very weather dependent. Use the lake we were on, the first lake today. It's going to be a 15-acre lake. You saw that muddy color of water.
Correct.
If you have high, muddy, cold water, it will kill hydrilla out. It will eradicate it out of fishery.
Okay.
So there's a fishery just down the road from here, Hubbard Creek. And Hubbard Creek had hydrilla 4 years ago. My company, some other companies, we do like little manicure sprayings around docks, like 10 foot around the docks.
Gotcha.
And things like that. And we haven't had to do that in 3 years because we had high muddy water and all the hydrilla went away.
Very interesting.
Which puts you on the no vegetation path, which
Yeah.
changes the fishery, changes the food chain.
Okay.
So if we were managing a fishery, we want aquatic vegetation, we want it to be diverse species so that it can cover all parts of the food chain and help prevent things like erosion and sediment input and those things. So every fisheries biologist wants that.
Got it.
But they want it in a controlled way that they can predict year in and year out. And it isn't just going to go away with a hard winter.
The biggest thing I'm gleaning so far from this is that diversity
is the key.
is important.
Yep.
So diversity in habitat, I'm assuming diversity in forage species
Absolutely.
as well.
Yep.
And that, I guess, leads me to my next question, which is, I love talking about grass. Grass is my favorite type of structure to fish.
Okay.
Is there one type of structure that genuinely is the best? Like if you're to pick one to really manicure and put out there in your body of water, is it brush piles or artificial, the mossback habitat stuff? Is it grass? Is it lily pads and cattails on the edge of the body of water? Is there one that's truly best?
I think it's going to be personal preference.
Okay.
What I prefer is riprap on the dam.
Okay.
We start with that.
Got it.
Then we have large boulders. You've seen those out here.
Yeah.
Just large boulder piles. I love a deep water, big boulder pile, and then individuals spaced out. Mossback has some really great product that I also throw in. I use the root wads, and I personally use what's called the conservation cube. It's something that's only available to state agencies or fisheries biologists.
Got it.
But that's one I use. It's high density in the center.
Okay.
And then for aquatic plants, we use American pondweed and water willow. Those are the two we go to. Every once in a while, I'll put in eelgrass as well.
Okay.
But so in my fisheries, I use all of those things. I use artificial, the rock, big piles, the riprap, and I use the aquatic vegetation.
Okay, so I knew I wasn't going to get an answer out of you because diversity is important. That's the general answer. When we have the biggest thing I think that messes up fishermen beyond not understanding the water and seasonal stuff is how does weather affect our bodies of water, like from a from a biological standpoint of a bass. Kind of go through all of the 4 main things. So like rain, wind, super hot, and super cold.
Okay.
How does that affect bass in bodies of water?
Yep, so we live in an atmospheric environment. So rain, wind, things like that impact us immediately.
Correct.
fish live in an insulated environment. Water insulates them from changes. So a lot of times whenever we have something happen to us, a cold front or something like that, we expect and we relate it to the fish.
Yeah.
But it's kind of delayed for them.
Okay.
Because the water insulates them. So surface water may cool.
Yeah.
So the fish that were up feeding are going to get deeper. Simple, because they're just moving down in the water column, but they're insulated. Whenever you say like, what is going to impact the fish most? Of course, we have seasonal changes that definitely impacts them, but it's over time the change in the environment. So we have a large rainfall event or a large rainfall event in a short amount of time, but it changes color or clarity.
Got it.
That's going to be a big one. They'll move to that flowing water because things are coming in. If we have cold fronts, there are species that are impacted, like threadfin shad. You know, they can die off. Florida bass, same thing. Florida bass are not as well adapt to a cold front.
Correct.
So those fish become lethargic. And that's the other part of this. Like, yes, they're insulated, but they're also a cold water species.
Okay.
So that means, or cold-blooded species. So that means that their body can't regulate temperature. So as temperature does drop, and it's on a delay, but as it does drop, it slows down their metabolism. So they need to eat less often. They need to breathe less often. They need to move less often. So they can appear more lethargic because naturally their body temperature is colder.
Okay.
But that takes time. So as a cold front comes in, it's actually some of the best fishing.
Yeah, yeah.
And sometimes whenever you're trying to fish for those fish, like putting on a square bill and burning it, like that's the best way to get them because they're still warm.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So it's funny you talk about metabolism with a bass because I feel like that's one conversation that people just like to throw the word out there. Their metabolism gets faster, slower. What's the big? Is water temperature the biggest driver of their metabolism?
Yeah. So water temperature drives their blood. So how fast does their heart beat and where does their blood go in their body? Because as it gets colder, they're going to put the blood to the extremities, like I need to save this part of my body.
Got it.
Whereas it's warm, that blood's just freely moving throughout the body. A largemouth in a year needs to eat 5 pounds for every pound that it weighs.
Okay.
To gain another pound, it needs 10 pounds of forage. So
in a year.
In a year. Okay. So it's not like a fish necessarily is eating 3 meals a day. A fish is eating whenever it has opportunity or it has hunger. It has hunger less often in cold water.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that it has less opportunity.
Yeah, gotcha.
So it would still, fish are still opportunistic. And one thing Gary Klein always talks about is the fact that a fish sometimes is just curious. And it can't grab and hold on to things, so it has to do it with its mouth.
Correct.
And so he always, tries to remind me like, curiosity, hunger, sometimes they just want to just grab onto things and see what it is.
Got it.
But metabolism, it does slow down because the blood flow slows down. So that means a food item stays undigested in the stomach longer. In the summer months, you may have a food item processed through a fish in 3 to 6 hours. In winter months, that may be 3 days for a food item to process through. It just depends on how cold that water is.
So a lot of the times, like I'm thinking about specific fishing, is it winter fishing in my experience, live scoping with a jerkbait. That's potentially more of a curiosity bite.
Or an aggression.
Or an aggression bite than it is a hunger bite.
Correct.
Got it. Because I see so much bait fish on my graph in the wintertime. They're all balled up and fish are going through them. And so I don't know why they would eat mine if they have so much real stuff to be eating.
Well, yours looks different, erratic and injured, strange. You know
Correct.
what I mean? It's like, what's wrong with that one? That one looks easier to grab.
Totally.
Yeah, and that's, when bait fish school, they school for one reason, and that's to protect themselves as an individual in a larger group.
Yeah.
It's hard to pick out one.
Exactly.
When you throw a jerk bait through a school, they can pick out that one.
Exactly.
So they can target your bait out of that whole school.
And so I think maybe they were arguing that their behavior doesn't necessarily slow.
Correct.
Because they can still move fast. They can still chase things.
Yeah.
But the physical act of them eating doesn't have to happen.
Right. Well, and then the recovery from that movement. They're still going to swim at 3 times their body length per second.
Yeah.
All the time. If they want to, they can burst speed and get that.
Exactly.
How long can they do that? And then how long does it take to recover changes based on metabolism.
Man, this is cool.
Yeah,
I'm liking
easy.
this. I'm liking this. Let's keep going. I saw a quote on one of your Instagram posts at the very end, and you quoted, "Lack of harvest ruins yet another private lake."
Oh, yeah.
So explain fish populations.
Okay.
Overpopulation, underpopulation, what stunted growth means, and if maybe somebody runs their HOA pond, how do they know if their pond is over or underpopulated as far as bass go?
That's a huge question.
I know.
Number one thing people get wrong is harvest.
Harvest.
We live in a catch and release culture, and that's wrong.
It's wrong.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
wrong for our private fisheries, our ponds, but it's also wrong for our reservoirs.
Got it.
You know, truthfully, the best thing for you to go out and do every time you film, whether it's a pond or a reservoir, is to keep your limit of fish.
Really?
Now, don't say, I'm going to take out all 6-pounders. That doesn't make sense.
Okay.
That's bad management. But if you are at a fishery that's got a slot limit that you're allowed to pull fish 12 to 14 inches, you should take 5 of those home.
Okay.
There's a reason that is there.
Got it.
There's a reason. But harvest is a key in ponds because they're smaller. So your competition, your natural mortality isn't as high.
Okay.
So if I lack harvest, I see that quicker in a pond. If you lack harvest in a reservoir, it takes 20 years before you really see it. That's why we're seeing it now. So harvest, what it does is it controls the predatory population to where there's enough resources in the carrying capacity to reach the size those fish are supposed to be. So if we make it simple and we said we can raise 100 pounds of largemouth per acre, that means we can raise 1,000 pounds of forage per acre. It means we can raise somewhere around 10,000 pounds of plankton per acre.
Okay.
So if all that's going perfect,
Yeah.
that's what we can have. Well, if we have 100 pounds of largemouth, how do you want them? Do you want 10 10-pound fish?
Yeah. I mean, is that a personal question?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question is.
I would rather have 25-pound fish.
Okay.
Is what I would say.
So then we have 25-pound fish.
No, 30, 33. Yeah, I don't. 20 is too little. 33 and a third pound fish.
Okay, so 33 pounders, right?
Yeah.
So now we have 33 pounders. We're going to say half are males, half are females.
Okay.
So I have 15 females.
Yeah.
Now every spring, those females are going to go spawn. And when they do, they're going to have about 2,500 eggs per pound of body weight. Okay? So 2,500 times 3 per fish, so 7,500 times 15. That's how many potential offspring we have this year.
Correct.
Now, if we had a 1% survival, we're still talking several hundred fish.
Yeah.
So then
And so you went from having 30 to several hundred.
you went to 30
Yeah.
3-pounders, and
Yeah.
we're doing great because that's exactly what you wanted. To the next year, now you need to pull out 200 fish so that you can keep your 33-pounders.
Yeah.
You see the difference? there?
Very interesting.
Now, in a reservoir, you're insulated because of the size of the reservoir. There's unproductive water, there's productive water, there's natural mortality. I mean, if we look across the United States, mortality is like 50% of all bass every year across all age classes.
Wow.
So there is some of that occurs naturally, but it's at all age classes. It's not targeted. So if we want to improve a fishery, we target where do we have too many fish, and we remove those down. That's where a harvest limit goes.
Got it.
So like these reservoirs we're on today, we're not harvesting yet. Next year on the 10-acre lake, we will put in a harvest. Because what we have now is we've had 3 generations, 3 spawns. We'll have our 4th next year, and we're just going to have too many mouths.
Yeah, I see.
So we'll start pulling fish out, and it goes back to those numbers. It takes 5 pounds per pound of body weight to maintain, plus 10 pounds for every pound you want to gain. So if I have a 3-pounder and I want to make it a 4-pounder, it has to eat 15 pounds, then an additional 10 pounds to become a 4-pounder.
Okay.
Now a 3-pound fish is eating, let's call it 3-inch bluegill.
Yeah.
There's 30 bluegill to the pound. So all I have to do is multiply it out and go, okay, well, I need 450 bluegill
Okay.
for that one fish to gain 1 pound.
Exactly.
It becomes just a math problem.
Yeah, and then if you have too many fish, you're splitting meals.
Right.
Between way too many of them.
So you
Okay.
can also think about it the other way, is I've got a 1-pound fish. Let's say it's eating 3-inch bluegill just to make it easy. So the 1-pound fish to get to another pound needs 10 pounds of forage. Well, that's still 300 bluegill.
Yeah.
So by pulling a 1-pound fish out, I save 300 bluegill for that 3-pound fish.
Okay.
So that's how we're shifting through harvest. We shift the forage.
Yeah.
Hopefully we grow them a little larger so they go a little further.
Okay.
But we're shifting forage and we're maximizing that carrying capacity.
Exactly. So the bigger your fish get, the more eggs they have,
Yes.
and therefore you must harvest more. So like if you're trying to grow giant bass, and they put more eggs and have more fry, it's important that you're harvesting.
As the fishery evolves,
Yeah.
you get a lot of nest predation. So you're going to
okay.
get that from a 6-inch bass that were born the year before.
Got it.
They're going to become nest predators for the little fry.
I see.
So you're going to have a higher mortality as the lake evolves as well, but you're still going to have a leakage of whatever the number is.
Got it.
100 to 200 fish, 300 fish per acre every year that have to come out.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So you're saying baby bass do eat other baby bass?
Oh, absolutely.
They are. What's the word I'm looking for?
Carnivores.
Carnivores.
No,
Carnivores.
cannibals.
Cannibals. There you go.
Cannibals.
Got it.
They are. They will eat each other. But yeah, Tyler, that's across. Like, if you're going to say, I'm only going to talk about one thing for pond management, and I'm going to do one thing only, it's harvest.
Got it.
Now, how you harvest is a little bit more of a difficult question. And so that was the second part of your question. It's like, well, how do I do it? The first thing you do is you get links and weights off of every fish you catch for the next year.
Okay.
And write them down.
Yeah.
If you can, you put an electrofishing boat in, and you do that because we can do it in an hour.
Yeah, way faster.
But you do it for an entire year. And then you look at those links and weights, and you take each individual fish, and you say, first, do I have a size class that is abundance? So let's say I do that, and I end up 40% of the fish are 12 inches. Well, that's where I'm going to harvest at.
Okay.
Because I want to reduce that number so I can level the population.
Got it.
That would be the first easiest thing to do.
That makes sense.
The next step to that, like I want a trophy fishery now, I'm going to say, I'm going to harvest all those 12-inch fish, but at 14 inches, my fish are underweight by 10 or 20%. So I also need to harvest those 14-inch fish and things below them so that forage grows up to feed them.
Got it.
So then now I start putting together a better harvest recommendation based on body condition of the fish, or what we call relative weight.
And that's why people should bring in a fisheries biologist.
Yeah,
If you have the resources, or I'm sure there's resources online they can learn from.
Yeah, on my website you can pull the calculator.
Okay, great.
So all you have to do is put your links and weights in, and it will tell you what your fish are. And I do it for there's like 7 species on there, because it's not just largemouth. I mean, we manage fisheries for trophy bluegill. We have smallmouth fisheries, hybrid striper fisheries, catfish.
Yeah.
And the principles go across all species.
Got it. And so yeah, if people want to catch fish, they have to be managed no matter what the species is.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I think when I thought about managing a pond, I always just thought, oh, just throw some threadfin in there. It'll be fine. But I think the catch and release, maybe because of the tournament culture, has just infused everything of our brains of we have to throw back every bass we catch.
No, that's the fallacy is that if I catch a bass, and it's a little guy, it's a 12-incher, that if I release it, it's going to grow bigger.
Yeah.
That's a fallacy, because fish grow through what's called indeterminate growth. Indeterminate growth means there's no age associated with their size. Instead, it's all forage based. So a 12-inch fish that I catch here or in a public reservoir could be anywhere from born this year to 10 years old.
Just
based on what it
how
ate.
much it ate.
Right, and that goes down to habitat, aggression, forage, all those things, competition.
Genetics, to a certain extent? No,
not really. Genetics are important, but they're more important in the fact that if everything is correct, then they will showcase the maximum that fish could be in that environment.
I see what you're saying.
If you don't have habitat, forage, the right competition, water quality, you can't showcase what genetics are.
So you can put as many Sharelunker fry into a body of water as you want, and you may end up with a mediocre fishery because you don't have diversity in cover and structure as well as forage.
If you had a stunted bass population where the fish are underweight for their length,
got it.
And you stocked them this year with Sharelunker offspring, there is no reason to expect those offspring to outgrow fish that were already in that environment.
Got it.
So the same crappy stunted genetic fish that you had will have offspring as well. And now they grow up in the same environment at fairly similar rates because of, unless the Sharelunkers have a competitive advantage due to aggression or something like that.
Very interesting. So that's why potentially some lakes that get a Sharelunker, it might be a very rare fish that comes out of that lake.
Correct.
And so I think of Possum Kingdom. And maybe I'm wrong about this, but I have found that I catch a lot of relatively small fish, and there's a few Sharelunkers.
Right.
So you're saying that by putting Sharelunker fry in there, it's not necessarily maybe growing as many big ones fast as if those fry went to a smaller, more stained water, healthier fishery?
I would say that whatever the carrying capacity is. Possum Kingdom is a deep, clear lake. Has a lot of gizzard shad, has some zebra mussels. It has golden algae as well. Golden algae limits that fishery's ability to raise trophy-sized fish because you're going to have periodic die-offs.
Got it.
If you take that scenario, and you say, I put Sharelunker offspring in there, or I take the scenario of a fertile fishery with a lot of diversity in the food chain, I put those same Sharelunkers in that other fishery, yes, you're going to have a higher rate of success in the one that's a better quality.
Got it. See, even I, as a Sharelunker catcher, thought that it was all about genetics.
Yeah.
Got it.
Genetics can only showcase what the carrying capacity of the fishery is.
Very cool. But those genetics, if you have the right ones and the right ecosystem, will then show.
Absolutely. Because you can have the wrong genetics and everything else is right.
Yeah.
And you still have, mediocre fish.
Got it.
They might produce some quality fish, but not as abundant as they could be.
Very interesting, very cool. So the next thing we're going to do is a few rapid fire questions that may actually turn out to be longer answers than I expect them to be. But these are kind of very hot topic things about bass fishing that people in the comment sections love to talk about. And the first is, how hardy are bass? Like, how much beating can they take? Can you boat flip it? Do you have to wet the board before you measure it? If I release the fish above the gunnel, am I killing that fish? How hardy is a bass?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is actually water quality based.
Wow.
And time of year. Because a fish is covered in scales, number one. That's the first line of defense. Second line of defense is its slime layer. So best management practices is you always use wet hands whenever you touch a fish. You always lay it on something that is wet because that prevents the loss of the slime layer. Whatever you do on land when you release that fish, there's a very limited chance you're going to kill a fish on land. With some of your handling techniques. If you are, you're being way over the top.
Got it.
Instead, you're releasing that fish and it swims off. Now, how much slime layer did I take off? That's a really important part of the question. How much bacteria did I transfer from my hands onto that fish? Dry hands or hands with sunscreen, insecticide, you're going to transfer more bacteria onto that fish. And you've removed the slime because you laid it down. That's going to show up 3 to 5 weeks later.
Interesting.
Now, depending on water quality.
Okay.
Because super warm environments that are low in dissolved oxygen, high in nutrient loads, really don't have great bacteria, that infection is going to show up more prevalent.
So like summertime tournaments.
Summertime tournaments. More prevalent. And if you've ever caught a fish with the white fuzzy on it, right? Like fuzzy fungus, that's Colmeris bacteria. And if you look close next time, if you ever see this, you're going to see that it's usually like 3 little dots right on the abdomen. And that's just perfect for me holding a fish, taking a picture.
Because I had sunscreen on my fingers.
Yes. And you usually see a 4th one on the other side. It shows up, I get the picture a lot. What is this?
Wow.
And then I go, it's perfect handprint on that fish.
Got it.
And so that is what happened to that fish 2 weeks ago. It was caught, it went through that same situation. Now there's times of years during the spawn where the fish is putting itself in that same kind of rough environment because it's using its tail and making a nest and things like that. Winter, usually bacteria is slower to grow, but it takes longer to get rid of because of that metabolism. The metabolism's slower, therefore the immune system's slower. So the best practice is wet hands. Yes, things that don't remove slime. So like if you're going to use a net, not a nylon net, use a rubber coated net.
And make sure the net's, I guess if you're netting it, it's going to get wet anyways. But
if you're going to lay the fish on the carpet, it should be wet carpet. Or hydro board, like something that isn't going to tear the fish up. Also think about the temperature that you're laying it on. A measuring board that's metal that's been sitting in the sunlight all day, that's going to remove a lot of slime real quickly.
Got it. I mean, I'm going to be honest, I've probably killed, now that I think about it, I've probably killed quite a few fish from delayed release mortality because of the way that I handled them. And so, kind of devil's advocate here, is that necessarily a bad thing? If we are so catch, weigh, release culture focused, of course we want to take care of our fish, but if some of them die from, being mishandled, is that necessarily bad?
There's 2 parts to that.
Okay.
First, if it was targeted at the right size class that helped the fishery. If I boat flip a 7-pounder and it flops around in my boat and loses slime, I take a couple of pictures and I release it, I feel fine because the fish swim off. If that 7-pounder dies, that was detrimental because what's it going to take to grow me a new 7-pounder? In a public reservoir, southern United States, maybe that's a 10-year-old fish. 8 to 10 years old.
Got it.
In a northern fishery, fish might be 15.
Okay.
So that's a hard one to replace.
Interesting.
If I'm talking about a 12-inch fish, not that a 12-inch fish doesn't matter, But for the fishery, yes, that's the size we needed to take out. Now there is, the other part of that question is, as an angler ethics, right? I would rather see you harvest the fish and eat the fish because it's not going to waste.
Got it.
That's going back into the environment. It's feeding something in the environment, turtles or whatever, but angler ethics, I would rather you harvest that fish yourself.
Interesting. And so, again, hot topic, do you think tournaments are doing too much harm, especially ones that are put them in the bag? And I'm gonna speak honestly. A lot of the attitude around tournament fishing is, oh, fish is fine. Flip them in the boat, coal tags through the bottom of the lip. It just doesn't seem like fish treatment is very high in terms of priority. Do you think those tournaments at some point need to change some of the behaviors or guidelines around fish?
Yeah. Maybe I should start by saying those were Tyler's words, not necessarily my words.
Correct. Yes. From my opinion. What's the advice from a fisheries biologist perspective?
And I think we should probably caveat it as I do work for Major League Fishing.
Correct.
And represent
I was going to get to that.
Okay.
And so, of course, that's why I agree with you that the catch-weight release thing is probably better for our fisheries. Yep. But just as leaving aside MLF, let's just talk about the Joe Schmo local trail at Ivy on a Tuesday night.
Mm-hmm. So let's say this. Let's say that tournament fishing is evolving and has been. In the angler side of how do we take care of fish has been evolving. So you look back at the 70s, they came in on a stringer.
Yeah.
Then they had coolers. Then they put an aerator in the cooler. Then it got integrated into the boat.
Okay.
Now it's a live well.
Yeah.
So then we say, okay, the live well now has an aerator. Now it can bring water in and put water out automatic. So things are evolving. Okay. So I look at catch-weight release as a natural evolution of that. Mm-hmm. If we originally, in 1970, had digital scales that we could hang fish and we had a way to enter them into a score tracker, we would have never evolved to fish a 5-fish tournament where we bring them to a weigh-in.
Okay.
But technology wasn't there.
Got it.
When I'm looking at the live well is a fairly safe place at this point. Mm-hmm. There's a few things that are still wrong with a live well when we're talking about transporting fish, especially like a northern fishery, like a Great Lakes fishery, and we got a little wind action and
correct.
Waves.
They're sloshing around in there.
There still could be perfected.
Yeah.
We also have live well additives, but most people don't know why they add them. Mm-hmm. Most people don't know, like if I was to ask you, whoa, what level of oxygen should be in your live well?
I don't know.
You couldn't even get me in the ballpark, right?
I don't even know the numbers.
What temperature?
Yeah, it's cold, I guess.
Yeah, and then how much ice should I add? Like those are the things that on the angler education side, if we want to be good stewards of a 5-fish limit live weigh-in tournament, those are the questions that anglers need to be able to answer.
Gotcha.
If you're not answering that, then you're not truly participating in conservation.
Very cool. Yeah, I would agree, and I think education out on your website, do you have?
Yeah, on MajorLeagueFishing.com,
okay.
The Fisheries Management Division page, we have really cool articles from our angler perspective on what do they do in their boats, and then I layer in, okay, but here's what we should be doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, I'm now this is a whole different can of worms, but there's a lot of people out there that don't like Major League Fishing. I think because it's a different format than they're used to. They might not like the leadership or whatever the deal is. But can you speak to what they're doing as far as conservation goes, and how on tour, maybe somebody who knows an MLF tournament's coming their way, how they can be involved in conservation?
Yeah, that's great, Tyler. So all of that comes through my department. Mm-hmm.
As you are a contractor with Major League Fishing.
Right, that's exactly right. I'm a director of their Fisheries Management Division. Mm-hmm. So my job, starting at the beginning of the season, to set the minimum scoreable weight. Work with the states to look at what does the average fish weigh at a certain length class, and then assign that a number.
Got it.
Because we want it streamlined, and we're talking about Bass Pro Tour, General Tire, Team Series.
So you're the guy who decides the minimum fish.
I make the first recommendation and let the anglers poke holes in it.
Got it. Very cool.
Yeah. So we go through that process, then we go to an event. Whenever we go to an event, catch-weight release event, our anglers in a week's time will catch between 1,500 and 3,000 fish. Mm-hmm. Those will be logged onto the score tracker. Every single one of those fish, I collect certain pieces of data on. Yeah. And I give that to the state agencies. And so the state agencies get things like species of fish, the actual weight of the fish, the GPS location, the time, the date, so they can make relevant decisions. So Major League Fishing makes a big effort into making sure that your state agency knows every fish that's caught. Because Before the catch-weight release format, what you were looking at is they would go online, the state agency biologist, and they would see your 5 fish limit.
Okay.
But that's in a bag. They don't know
Where it was caught.
They don't know where it's caught, but they also don't know, was that a 3, a 5, a 2, a 1? They didn't know what was in that bag.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, do I have one big fish or do I have a mix? They don't know.
I see.
So we were able to do that for the state agencies, and we provide that to every state.
Yeah.
We do a DNA analysis for Florida alleles on all fish over 7 pounds caught by one of our anglers. So we do a mouth swab where we take buccal cells and we send that off to be analyzed for Florida genetics. We're really looking at what does it take across the United States to grow exceptional fish.
Yeah, yeah.
Now we talked about earlier, all things considered, everything else has to be right to show that genetic.
Correct.
But we at least need to know that information. We need to know both sides of that story. We do on-the-water habitat projects using artificial habitat from mossback fish habitat. Now that's not at every event. Those are based on Minn Kota's our partner for that. So Minn Kota looks at our schedule, I work with them, and we work with the states to figure out who needs it.
Exactly.
And we try not to be on competition waters. So we'll be adjacent to the competition.
Yeah. And is that something that locals could come help out with?
Absolutely. So if you are an MLF member, you log on, you sign up for MLF, it's free.
It's free.
Then you get the email that says, we're coming to town, this is where we're doing, this is where we're meeting. And we usually have 3 to 5 anglers join us as well, so you can spend some time with whatever anglers are off that day.
Exactly.
So we try to do a lot. We do a couple of research projects every year, partnering with universities, and those vary. And then at the end of every year, we do what we call the Berkeley Lab Summit, which is an agency biologist only meeting that we host on Microsoft Teams, and we go through the data we collected, the Florida allele data, and then we have guest speakers that present on topics. So this year will be fish disease. Major League Fishing helped the state of Michigan identify largemouth bass virus in smallmouth bass 2 years ago, so we're going to present on that.
Got it.
We're also part of the team that is looking at blotchy bass prevalence throughout the United States.
Okay.
So those black tattoo spots on fish. Yeah, they figured out that is a virus. They don't know what impact that virus has, but our team is part of that, collecting that data.
Got it.
And then we also have MLF International. So I've got, I think it's 24 countries that participate, and we do the blotchy bass on the international side.
Got it. And that brings me to, again, all the stuff is, I'm sure, on his website, on Major League Fishing website, but that brings me to one virus that was a quick topic I wanted to talk about, and that is blind bass, specifically blind largemouth.
Okay.
Did you see at Cayuga this year, the amount of largemouth that were blind?
Right.
What is that kind of virus? Is that it causes them to be stinky? I know that. The bass when they're blind, they're stinky.
Okay.
And so do you know why that is?
Yeah, so there is no virus associated with that.
Okay.
That we're aware of. I will tell you that I have had the same situation in private lakes.
Okay.
In private lakes, what ends up happening is there's a nematode. That part of its life cycle is a white grub that lives in the eye of a fish.
Okay.
And what that nematode's job is, all the little grubs, is to cloud the top of the eye so that the fish will come to the surface and a bird will eat it. Because the other part of that life cycle is inside of a bird.
Okay.
And we see them a lot in gizzard shad. So any fishery,
I have seen that, yeah.
Any fishery that's heavy in gizzard shad will typically have that seasonally. And as bass eat those gizzard shad, that parasite enters the bass. So you see that. Most things are most easily explained by looking down the food chain and figuring out what is this fish eating, where is it living, what's the water quality, and you can answer most of those questions.
And also those bass, on average, I saw were darker. Why is the pigment on those darker?
Yeah, that is a natural camouflage mechanism of largemouth and smallmouth.
Correct.
Most fish, actually.
Yeah.
Whenever they're in shallow environments, then their scales, their skin will produce more pigment. That's just so that you can help avoid predators.
Got it. And so because they're blind, they have to live shallower.
Well, because they're blind, they can't see sunlight.
Oh,
so
yeah. Okay.
they're not able to regulate pigment correctly.
Got it. Yeah. And speaking of seeing, another quick topic. How do bass see color?
Okay. So we don't actually know.
Okay.
Yeah, they have rods and cones, and there's some debate about how many they actually have. There's a biologist that has done some work. She's even got an app to where you can see what she perceives the color to be. But there's very little concrete data on that. Mainly because how scientific research works is based on need or financial reasons. And there's no real need to figure out the complex structure of a fisheye.
I gotcha. We're catching enough fish as is. If we stopped catching fish, maybe we'd have to figure out if they can see color.
That's right.
Very interesting. Next one. Is the spawn, I'm talking about the main spawn. We'll talk about fall spawn here in a second. Is the main bass spawn driven by moon phase, water temperature, length of day, or yes?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
dang it.
Temperature. Temperature's going to move the fish shallow.
Okay.
It's going to start the egg production, but fish start egg production much earlier than you think at the beginning of winter, not at the end. So they start their egg production. They'll move eggs through their body. They become ripe at a certain time based on metabolism, speeding up that metabolism with temperature.
Correct.
And then length of day triggers them. It's the photic period, the amount of sunlight in every day, triggers them to go to the shoreline because then spring is coming. Photo period also includes moonlight. So then you have full moon, and that increases photo period.
Oh, so if you have a full moon and it's a cloudy night, that's not going to have really much of an effect on bringing a wave of fish up.
Yeah, you need that photo period.
Got it. So, but I've also heard that the bigger fish move up just before the full moon, not necessarily on it.
Yeah.
So it's not just like the maximum light gets the maximum fish.
Here's probably the hardest pill to swallow: is big fish spawn first.
Yeah.
No bass spawn once. They spawn multiple times in that spawning season. So what you end up having is big fish move shallow, and we call shallow relative with big fish because that could be 10 to 12 foot, and they'll nest that deep.
Correct.
They'll drop approximately 50% of their eggs. Then they'll move offshore, those females. A couple days to a week, come back, drop 50% of their eggs, leave, come offshore, do it again. So they're decreasing in size that whole time because their egg mass is decreasing. But fish average 2 to 4 spawns per female per season.
Okay.
Because it is evolutionarily, it is better to distribute your eggs along a longer season.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because if you have some sort of weather event or predatory event, you don't want to lose all your offspring at one time.
Okay, got it. And so that brings us to the fall spawn. We talked about it a little bit in the video of us shocking the fish. Does a fall spawn happen everywhere? And what is what triggers a fall spawn?
Yeah, fall spawn could happen everywhere. A fall spawn is usually when resources are abundant and competition is low.
Okay.
Then what you have is fish that are going to take a competitive advantage. They have eggs that are being produced. You have the right temperature window. Everything's perfect.
Yeah.
Their body goes into the natural, it's time to spawn mode.
Okay.
And so they will. So we see it a whole lot in pond management, especially in Texas.
Yeah.
We see it in Florida a lot. As you move north, it's less obvious because your seasons are so short. And it's probably slightly less abundant. It doesn't happen as often.
Got it. And so they spawn the same way?
Yeah.
They make a bed?
Yeah.
The males are always ready as well?
The males are ready.
Okay.
If the females would spawn year round, the males are ready.
Gotcha. Yeah. That's good to know. And then the last one that I had that is a total regression from talking about spawning is more about fish health. And I call it a Senko bass or a worm bass.
Right.
And I don't know why I call it that. Somebody told me one time that like a bass that is as thin as paper is because they have a worm stuck in their digestive tract. Why? What's the actual scientific reason for when I catch a bass and it is thin?
Yeah.
What's wrong with that fish?
A percentage of those fish have a worm stuck in their digestive tract.
Okay.
The majority of those fish have internal parasites.
Internal parasites. Got it.
Roundworms will just fill the abdomen. Can also fill the stomach. So majority of those fish are consuming nutrient, but it's being absorbed by all the parasites within their body.
Okay, and that just allows that stops them from gaining any weight.
Right.
Got it.
Because there's something absorbing.
And then eventually that fish dies.
Yeah, it can starve.
Got it.
Malnutrition. So it becomes more lethargic. It's not able to handle bacterial infections. Those things.
And does that seem to happen more in small fish or large fish?
It's across the board.
Okay, because I feel like I've caught more paper fish that are small, but I've also caught some fish that have an 8-pound head. I mean, they weigh 4.5 pounds.
Yeah, that could be a fish that's aging out.
Okay, got it.
That's a 14-year-old fish that really shouldn't be here anymore. It's a dinosaur.
I see what you're saying.
I would say that if I was looking for a habitat type, vegetation leads to more parasites.
Okay.
So more vegetation, dense vegetation, 60-70% coverage
Yeah.
that you're fishing, the more likely you're going to see those paper thin fish.
Okay. And then one more thing that I thought about that I asked Tom Lang from the Sharelunker
Yeah.
program about this, but I kind of have a different way to phrase it, is another YouTuber out there caught a Sharelunker a week after I did and decided not to turn it in because of he thought it would be handling the fish too much, and I guess the previous history of the program, a lot of fish had died. We've had technology and knowledge advancements, and so I think the last 2 years we've had no fish die.
No fish die.
And so the argument I hear from lots of people, including that one YouTuber, is I'm going to let this fish go so it can spawn in its natural habitat and it can continue to thrive.
Yep.
But if we know now that, bringing it in and out of the live well and measuring it and then weighing it by the jaw, could that fish potentially just die 3 weeks later? Whereas if you had given it to the Sharelunker program, they could have rehabilitated it. Like, my fish was not doing well at all.
Right.
If I had released the fish that I caught 2 years ago, I think it would have died pretty soon after.
Yeah.
So do you think it's better that people, if they can give their fish to the Sharelunker program, that they do that?
Well, the Sharelunker program is an amazing program.
Correct.
And like you said, it has evolved over time. And what you have now, especially at Ivy is a 6-hour drive from Athens where the fish are actually going to be spawned.
Yeah.
So whenever your response is 6 hours, then that's a lot of hold time, either in a live well or in like a minnow vat or something like that.
Got it.
So that probably led to some of the issues early on in the program's history. Now the response team is different.
Yeah.
You have a local biologist that has a Sharelunker vehicle, pure oxygen, that's going to come out and assess that fish right away. If for some reason that biologist said, we can't save this fish, they're going to release it.
Got it.
Because they don't want to transport a fish that ends up dying either.
Yeah, yeah.
So if it was already too far gone, Tyler, they would have been like, Tyler, man, your fish is going to not make it.
Exactly.
So they thought whenever you caught your fish, this is a doable thing.
Yeah.
So maybe it was experiencing barotrauma and need to be fizzed. They would know how to side fizz that fish correctly, pulling the exact amount of air out of the swim bladder and letting that fish be stable.
Yep.
They're going to put it into an environment that has the right amount of dissolved oxygen for recovery. They're going to put it into an environment that has the right salinity to allow slime coat to be reestablished. So they are going to do really good fish husbandry within that box. Now, I would say the other part of that is the fish gets transported across to Athens. Once it arrives in Athens, it goes into the holdout tanks where, they do whatever needs to be done. Same thing, salt, oxygen, to get that fish to continue to recover.
Yeah.
And then the most important part is they pair it for spawning.
Okay.
And instead of having mortality of the offspring, like you would in the natural environment, they send those offspring through the process to where there is no predatory bass to consume them.
Gotcha.
So the idea that I'm going to put this fish back and it's going to spawn and therefore contribute just as many offspring to that environment is probably not true.
Okay.
Because their offspring are going to get eaten.
Got it. That makes
Probably
sense.
by them.
Yeah, I guess so. And so, I guess, are bigger bass hardier necessarily? So, like, could they withstand more, handling and laying down and
I wouldn't consider it hardier. No.
Okay.
I would say probably the opposite, especially when we're talking about those fish 13, 15, 17 pounds. Those fish bodies, they're older, but they also have weight in places that younger, thinner fish don't.
Okay.
So whenever they're being held outside of the water, that weight impacts their body a little different.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
So, because water is a zero gravity person, I mean, it's not zero gravity,
But
it's
it makes them a lot more buoyant and lighter.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Got
their bone structure did not evolve to be held above the water. That's just not how their bones evolved.
Very interesting, because I feel like the maybe it's a culture thing, but also education thing, is like, if you're catching trout and muskie, those you want to keep in the water and of course use wet hands. But it's almost like bass. I was never taught that bass are the same way. Just maybe because I mishandle a trout and it dies right then. But you mishandle a bass and it swims off and you think it's just fine.
A trout has smaller and different types of scales than a largemouth does.
Yeah.
It's family lineage.
And muskie has no scales.
Right, and muskie take a long time to grow to that size.
Correct.
So you also have to look like, how much resources did it take and how long did it take to grow this fish? And I mean, I even relate it to like kayak fishermen. I think kayak fishermen are more conservation minded than typical bass fishermen.
Yeah.
because they're on the water, they're wetting the measuring board and they're releasing the fish right away, they have that ingrained in that competition a little bit better. There's no part of me that's saying like we shouldn't harvest fish. In fact, we should harvest more fish.
I guess so, yeah.
But we also should protect those fish that we've have the resources invested into, and they've got the longer lifespan and they're more impactful. The other thing is, a largemouth over 6 pounds is always a female.
Yeah.
So whenever we're talking about tournaments and we're impacting mainly females on that larger size, that becomes a lot more important.
Got it. And then one more question about spawning and catching spawning fish. Does, and maybe it's on a lake by lake basis or how much fishing pressure, but does catching both smallmouth and largemouth negatively impact the fishery on beds? If you catch it and you release it right away.
Gotcha. So we do not catch enough fish annually to create true impacts.
Okay. So not even with the invention of live scope.
No.
Or any type of sonar, that's really not affecting the fisheries like we think it is.
I'm talking about professional fishing. Like there's not enough events that are really grinding away at that. There is a lot of research towards mortality of bed or abandonment of bed, and usually that's associated with time out of water.
Okay.
So the longer a fish, especially as it increases over 5 minutes, is away from the bed, the more likely it is to not go back to that bed.
Oh, so it's not even like a bluegill's ate all the eggs. It's just that fish may not even go back.
It's not going to go back.
Okay.
If it's over 5 minutes. So we transport a fish across for away, and that fish is never going back to that bed.
Got it.
Just not happening.
Okay.
If we're catch, weigh, release, and we're averaging, for us, we average 24 seconds out of water time.
Yeah.
The majority of the time, that fish goes immediately back to the bed or adjacent to the bed to recover, and is back on the bed within a couple of minutes.
Got it.
Hence why you can then recapture that fish again. And that becomes a whole nother issue.
Okay.
Now, there is also the predation of that bed. So depending on what type of forage we're talking about, bluegill, green sunfish, even golden shiner minnows, or gobies, like even crawfish, but some of those species will be quicker. But it takes, on average, I believe it's 3 minutes for gobies to really start to get onto a nest to start mattering.
Correct.
And then it takes a much longer time, up to 15 minutes, for it to be enough to eat the entire bed.
I see what you're saying.
So as long as we're catching those fish and releasing them really quickly, then we shouldn't be impacting the bed loss. Now, to go back to my original statement, we don't really have the fishing pressure across the entire reservoir enough to make sure every bed is eradicated. Like that just doesn't happen.
Because fish spawn deeper than we can see and dirtier water.
And over a longer timeline.
Correct.
And there's more beds than there are anglers. You start looking at the mathematics of it. It's very difficult for, especially a tournament, to really be impactful to this spawn.
Got it.
And most of our reservoirs have too many fish anyways. So
because that's, I'm going to be on the nose here. That's a comment that I get quite often on spawn fishing content, is you're not a real fisherman. A real fisherman would leave the fish alone. Like, you're a sissy that you're trying to prove your skills by catching bedfish. And I think the general idea is just, if you catch bedfish, you are hurting our lakes. Yeah. And so you're not, from a fisheries biologist.
Yeah, you would have to have, a 200-300 boat field, and they would all have to be catching females off the bedfish.
Okay.
And taking them to a weigh-in.
Yeah.
And we would have to have like a 10-day long tournament to see some impact. I mean, that's very unrealistic.
Now, is maybe there's an advice sort of thing.
Yep.
Should someone, if they can, stay away from physically bedfishing?
That becomes the ethics of do I bedfish?
Yeah.
If you're in a competition, you're typically in a competition to catch the biggest fish you can possible.
Yeah.
So you've already put yourself in that situation. So is there another way to catch similar sized fish that aren't bedding fish? If there were, you'd be doing it.
I know. Correct.
So you've kind of put yourself in that situation. So, for me personally, that is a big reason why I'm a proponent of catch, weigh, and immediate release. That format just avoids a lot of that issue.
Exactly.
The other thing is it really comes down to your tournament directors. Your tournament directors are putting you on that body of water at that time of year.
Yeah.
Scheduling can be very important. You could avoid the majority of spawn by 2 weeks later, 2 weeks earlier. So that's a tough question, and as a sportsman, you have to weigh that.
Correct.
You have to weigh that. You're signing up for that event. You've already you've already signed on to it.
But it's good to know that not necessarily justification, but if you do go out there, you're on Lake Fork, you see a 10-pounder laid up there, it's a Tuesday, there's no tournaments, you can catch that fish, release it. Yeah. And you made that memory, and you probably didn't do any kind of noticeable damage to the fishery.
And the females are on for such a short window anyways.
Correct.
You know, it's very difficult to catch them. The guarding male is a lot more common.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you're on fork and you're just fun fishing, you're going to release that fish right away. There's no reason that you couldn't take advantage and catch that fish.
Got it.
Yeah.
And then the last question I had is, bring LiveScope into this a little bit, but overall, fisheries across the country, you've seen data because of MLF tournaments and maybe just your connections talking to people. Are our fisheries worse off now because of technology and fishing pressure than they were a decade, 2, 3, 4 decades ago? Or are they better because of better fisheries management and stocking understanding? So what's the state of our fisheries?
That's a great question. So we'll start with the height of reservoir construction in the United States was the 60s and 70s. Immediately when a reservoir is impounded, you go through a new lake effect.
Got it.
That is the best the fishery will naturally be.
Okay.
Then management has to happen. So management has evolved. So today our fisheries are typically better. If I'm just saying general, they're better today than they ever were.
Okay.
Caveat with that very first 5 to 10 years of the new lake effect, because that was a natural. But those weren't maximized because the fisheries management didn't understand how to stock them correctly. So you're close to boat art, you're going to get to see what management looks like in a brand new fishery, and it's going to be unbelievable.
That's awesome.
Yeah, you saw a little bit of that today.
Yeah.
Now, I will say technology has sped up the process of finding fish. It doesn't necessarily speed up the process of catching fish. And across the board, to the biologists I talk to across the states, they're more concerned with forward-facing sonar in regards to species that people actually consume.
Crappie.
So crappie.
Got it.
Because that's a consumptive use.
Yeah.
I'm going to take 20, 25 fish out, and if I can use forward-facing sonar to target the bigger fish, and I do that, then that has a greater ability to impact the fishery.
Got it.
A tournament that's doing typical tournament activities, whether it's catch, weigh, release, or a 5-fish live weigh-in, they're releasing those fish back. So there's very little mortality.
Got it. Unless they were handled bad.
Unless they were handled bad, or it was a tournament that was booked in the wrong time of year by a tournament director.
Got it.
But still, very little mortality, and it doesn't really change. You're only going to have 5 fish per angler. You know, so
I gotcha.
The forward-facing sonar is not going to hurt competitive angling, in the fact that most state agencies are not going to jump to the conclusion that they need to ban forward-facing sonar for that. Crappie fishermen, guides, those industries, because it's a consumptive use, would be more apt to having an issue with forward-facing sonar.
Okay, gotcha. Maybe that's why all the old guys say, well, it's not like it used to be, and that's because they fished all these new lakes that popped up that had
fished a lot of new lakes.
Got it.
Yep. I mean, you saw it today with electrofishing.
Yeah.
Look how good those 2 new lakes are.
Correct.
The real challenge becomes, year 5 to 7, how are we managing it? We're going to grow double-digit fish in these lakes. But at year 5 to 7, how do we manage it to create longevity?
Got it.
The problem with our large reservoirs is their watersheds are so big. You have siltation occurring, so you're getting shallower.
Yeah.
That siltation brings in nutrients, so you're going through nutrification, which leads to some harmful algal blooms. You have more users, not just anglers, users of the body of water, and I don't necessarily even mean people on the body of water. I'm talking like houses that are being, water's going to them from the lake. So you got to think about all those things, because that is part of reservoir management.
Man, it's so cool to talk to somebody who's a fisherman. You like catching fish, but also you have the understanding, because of, again, your education, to know not only how to make private bodies of water better, but also public bodies of water. And I think we need more people like you in not just the state of Texas. I think Texas, we're very blessed to not only have people like you, but also Texas Parks and Wildlife as a whole is fantastic. The Sharelunker program as an extension of that is great. But there's a lot of states that don't have a whole lot of people like you guys who are fishermen, but also conservationists at the same time. You may have fishermen that love fishing, but they don't know squat about the data and the science behind things.
I would slightly disagree.
Okay.
because every state agency, and I deal with every single one of them,
Yeah.
every biologist that's there is a fisherman.
Okay.
Every one of them.
Do you just, maybe I'm biased then because we just have more lakes?
We have more lakes, and we have a budget, and we have a plan.
Got it.
That's really efficient.
Uh-huh.
We have different challenges. You know, we also have different lake authorities. So we can't, whenever we look at a fishery, a reservoir, and we say, man, that wasn't a great day fishing, or this is on a downturn.
Yeah.
We have to understand some of that's seasonal and cyclic in nature in the reservoir,
Yeah.
and other parts of it may just not be your fisheries biologist decisions.
Okay.
Those are things that are out of their control.
Got it. Because people all the time tell me, man, I wish we had the Sharelunker program in
Yeah.
this state.
Well, I will tell you, states like Arkansas puts probably more effort than any other state.
Really?
They're unbelievable in the effort they put in.
Cool.
States like South Carolina, North Carolina, unbelievable leadership in biologists.
Great.
States like Tennessee. I work with, Tyler, I work with every biologist, because with MLF, I have to collaborate with them on the data sharing.
Correct.
But I'm telling you that the majority are great anglers that want better fisheries.
Yeah.
What you described would be the minority, is the people that aren't really consumptive users. They don't go out on the water, they don't fish.
Yeah.
A lot of them fish tournaments.
Gotcha. Yeah.
They just don't fish them in their district because they don't want people complaining.
I got it. Yeah. Well, I guess that then my encouragement to myself and also to you guys who are watching is maybe reach out to your fisheries biologist.
There you go.
And maybe try to understand. Maybe you've got a gripe with this lake authority or whatever, and you want to put blame on somebody. Maybe call your local fisheries biologists who are in charge of these things and try to understand their perspective.
Yeah, I think my recommendation would be contact them, and instead of saying, here's my gripe, say, how does this work?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, hydraulic control, how does that work on this reservoir?
Yeah.
Water levels, how does this work? Because I guarantee those are not in that biologist department. They may get a little bit of like, here's what I would do, but it's probably above them, and it's probably in a different company or different department. Yeah.
Well, this has been an eye-opening conversation. I'm sure this won't be the last time we talk.
Right.
We'll probably go deeper into some topic in the future. I want to thank you for joining the channel.
Absolutely.
And back to you, Tyler, in the studio. That sounded kind of newsy.
I love that though. Wait.
Back to you, Tyler.
What a stinking interview. I don't know about you, but I'm honestly left with even more questions that I didn't have the chance to ask him. You know, after getting the chance to watch this, I am just full of things that I'm gonna talk to him in the future, and so I'm sure you guys are as well. Hopefully you learned something. As all my videos, I want you guys to become better bass anglers, and as a part of that, we also kind of have to be bookworms to a certain extent. We have to understand the why about bass fishing to truly become better anglers. And it's not just the why do you choose certain lures or why does the weather do this, it is why are bass the way they are. And hopefully today you guys learned, just like I did, a heck of a lot about the fish that we target. If this video piqued your interest and you want to learn more about the Texas Sharelunker program, I will leave my interview with Tom Lang, their director, over here in the corner. Share this video with somebody, and we'll see you guys next time right here on TRF.